Hello! Let's look into my favorite books of 2021. I'm so excited to bring you this video. I have the stack here in front of me, obviously. So I went through all of the 5-star books that I rated this year. I left out one reread because that's already in my favorite books of all time, so I kind of left that out. But I also went through some memoirs and nonfiction because I don't rate memoirs on this channel, so I went through those books as well. So I never rated them explicitly as 5 stars, but they were still some of my favorite books of the year. So let's just get right into it. So the first book over here on my list is There. This was one of my Native American reads. I have native roots in the US. I'm trying to get to know them from a respectful distance, because obviously I know I didn't grow up in a native community and I grew up here in Europe totally detached from everything, but I'm still naturally curious about my ancestors and where my peoples came from. And so I'm just trying to understand more cultural aspects, I guess, of what my family went through and some trauma that we had in our family. And so I'm starting to read more native literature, listening to native podcasts and so forth. So this book is multiple view and multiple timelines, so it can be a little difficult for some people to read. I'm just going to say that up front. However, there is a list of characters at the front of the book, which I thought was really good. And this book was interesting to me on several different aspects. Number one, we have different indigenous peoples that we're following throughout their daily lives. They all have a different connection to an indigenous community. So some of them actually grew up in indigenous communities. They're part of a nation. They know exactly, or they know as best as you can, what their roots are. And some of the people in these books grew up detached from Native American communities just like me. And it was the first time that I ever saw those kind of thoughts about this specific topic in a book. And that's why this was just, to me, this was phenomenal, because yeah, it's a very specific problem that you have. It's very specific ideas and things that you think if you grew up detached from a community like that, and to see that reflected in this book just told me that I'm not alone and that there are other people out there that feel exactly the same, and that I just need to find them. So that made me really, really happy. I know it may sound ridiculous. And also there was this one person in this book who described exactly what I feel like when I walk into communities, because it's really hard to describe, but I'm obviously white passing. I'm not white passing enough. So people still look at me and think, huh, what are your roots? And no one ever sees that part of me. And to see a person in this book actually talk about that, to talk about not feeling native enough and not feeling like they look native, but white people not really treating them 100% white, was just a weird thing to read and something great to see. Let's move on to the next book. So the next book over here is Severance. This book is about a young woman who basically faces a pandemic. I'm not sure what your stance on this is, but in the pandemic, I was kind of interested in reading books about pandemics because it just helped me process the feelings that I was going through. And this was actually one of those books. And this young woman, she basically works in an office and this pandemic hits. This was a weird criticism of capitalism on one side, and then you had this whole pandemic storyline going on, and what happened to this person, and it was just a fascinating combination of the two. And it's really, really hard to describe, but if you've read it, you know exactly what I mean. And if you haven't read it, this just may seem really random. But basically she keeps following her same routine until almost everyone in the city is dead or is totally affected by this fever. And it's just completely fascinating because she just doesn't really know what else to do. She really doesn't know what to do because this pandemic broke out and all she knows is work. But what is she supposed to do? What else? Because she has no family and doesn't really know where to go. So it's just a really weird crossing of those two topics. I thought this was a really great read. It was a pandemic book, a dystopian book that had this twist in it, because often dystopian books have the same type of storyline. So this was really refreshing because it just brought a nice element into it, which I really loved. The next book on my stack here is a memoir, and it is called In Order to Live. And this was just absolutely fascinating to me. This is about a young woman, Yoonmi, who has fled from North Korea. She was born and raised in North Korea, but she eventually fled to South Korea via China. And this was just mind-blowingly fascinating because I mean, obviously we don't really know what goes on behind closed doors in North Korea. We kind of know there are several documentaries and so forth, but just reading her first-hand account of what happened in North Korea and also talking about what happens to people who try to flee from that situation, just the whole story was just so fascinating. And several times I would just get up and walk over to my boyfriend. I'd be like, oh my God, can you believe this? Oh my God. And I just absolutely 100% recommend this because it's like George Orwell's 1984 in real life. It's just crazy. I was just stunned by this book and I think you should read it. There's nothing else to say. The other book over here is The Vanishing Half, and you've probably heard a lot about this book because this book is just phenomenal. This book is about two sisters. They are Black and grew up in a Black community. However, they are white passing, and one of the sisters grows up in the white world and one of the sisters then kind of stays in the Black world. This is just a fascinating story of their children, of their families, of their situations, and how that came to be and how they came together, what the cultural differences of growing up in two different worlds can be, how easy or difficult that was for either person and their children, and just a phenomenal book. I highly recommend you read this. This wasn't just an interesting social study of the situation in the States and growing up in different worlds, but it was also just wonderfully and beautifully written. I mean, this was just a beautifully written book. I mean, in several instances, it just made me cry because it was written so wonderfully. And I don't know, this was just a mind-blowing book to me. And this book really reminded me of why I love to read, because it was beautiful. It had a story to tell. So this book is another memoir called Know My Name, and this is actually by the survivor of the Stanford sexual assault case. We only knew her as Jane Doe for a certain amount of time, and now she's come out with her name. Her name was Chanel Miller, and she wrote about this case from her perspective. Many of you have probably heard of this sexual assault case because this guy was framed as such a good guy that wouldn't normally do this, and oh my God, he's on the swim team, and la 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 la. And so he never really got what he should have gotten as a sentence. Chanel Miller just shows her part of the story and how she was treated, how she was always framed as the person who was asking for it, and how she was always constantly trying to prove that it doesn't really matter what she was doing. It doesn't really matter whether she was drinking or whatever she was doing. She still has the right to not be assaulted. Just going through all of these different ways victim blaming can happen in a system. And I just thought it was fascinating, and it was also just written really well. I mean, sometimes memoirs are just really good because they're really interesting stories, right? I mean, not stories, but obviously they're just interesting lives. But Chanel Miller is also a really good writer. So this actually did feel like fiction in certain points. It was just so well written, well formulated. But yes, highly recommend. What a good memoir. And I can't stress it enough. Please read this. Anyway, the next book over here is actually a book that I didn't give 5 stars. I think I gave this book 4.5 because I didn't really like the ending. But I've actually found myself thinking about this book a lot. And so I thought it had to go on to my favorite books of the year, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This was a really interesting book. This is about Addie LaRue, obviously, and she makes a pact with the devil where she gets to basically live forever, but there's always a catch, right? If you do a deal with the devil. So her catch is that nobody can ever remember her. Like, she can leave no mark on the world. She can't even write stuff down because she can't leave a mark on the world. So nobody can remember her. She can't write anything down. She can't paint anything. She can't break anything. She can't do anything until she meets this one guy who can remember her. And then the story unfolds, and I don't really want to say anything else, but this was just such a cool idea of a story. I really love the idea. When I keep thinking of this book, it's like I keep remembering that feeling. I don't know. So, you know, with every single book, you have like this feeling in your stomach of like what the book feels like. I don't know if you have this, but I certainly do. Like, every book that I've read has a feeling, or every book that I've loved has a feeling in my stomach. And I think of this book very often, and I get that feeling every single time I think of it. And so that's why this is not my favorite book. It's an intriguing story. It's really interesting. It really makes you think about your mortality and like the marks that you leave in this world and how things are woven together, what ideas are and how they can be passed on. Yeah, I really like this book. I didn't like the ending that much. There were some things that I didn't like storytelling wise, but this book just has this feeling to it, and I don't know, I really liked it. The next book on my list here is Transcendent Kingdom, and this book is about, I always forget the names of the protagonists, Gifty. And she is a 6-year PhD student, and she's also a second-generation immigrant. I don't even know how to put this. This book deals with so many different themes like substance abuse, education, religion, generational trauma, immigrants, so many different topics. Racism, institutional racism, even especially in education, so many different topics, and it does it perfectly. If I wanted to like give a book to a person to basically widen and broaden their mind about the issues that we have in our society, I would be like, here, read this. Then you can understand more about the human nature and the things that we fuck up. So that's why I just absolutely love this, and it's not even that long. I mean, how brilliant do you have to be as an author if you can put so many topics into like 260 pages and just do it. I just thought this was amazing. So yes, if you were interested in this, if you were interested in any of those topics, please check out Transcendent Kingdom. I also like that the author actually looked at labs beforehand because she's a 6th-year PhD student in neuroscience, and you actually get a good depiction of what lab work is like. So she really did her homework. Just an excellent book all around. The second to last book over here is Little Fires Everywhere. I was actually really excited about this book because I saw the series before I actually read the book. I know you're not supposed to do that. I already really liked the series and like the moral dilemma that comes up in the series about, if you've read it, you know what it is, about a baby situation. And I loved the point of it because it was such a good discussion of like, what do you want for children? I'm not going to talk too much about that, but this is basically about a mom and her daughter who move into like a real suburban town where everything is regulated, where someone comes around and measures how high your grass is and how they fare there, because that mom kind of has a bit of a secret about her daughter and how her daughter came to be, and then the whole situation unfolds. This is just such a cool book. I kind of didn't really like any of the characters in the book. I don't really root for anyone, but it's just interesting how this drama just explodes and everyone just has their part in it, but everyone is so fused into their role and into how society shaped them that they kind of can't react any differently. Did I explain that well? But it was really cool, and I really enjoyed this way more than I did enjoy the series. I already thought the series was really good, but this book just brought so many more issues to life. There are so many quotes in here, and it was just written really well. Am I describing these books well? I have no idea. I really truly don't know if this is a helpful description. So the last book over here, but certainly not the least, this is probably, could be the most favorite book of the year, is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This book just tore me apart. I was just crying so much after this book. I just absolutely loved it. So it's about Evelyn Hugo. Evelyn Hugo obviously has had 7 husbands, and she has a journalist come to her house and interview her about her 7 different husbands. So in the course of this interview, she explains why she had different husbands, and she basically reveals who the true love of her life actually was. And what the author did with this book was she was really good at making all of the characters in this book seem real. And it was probably one of the best and most realistic, and therefore like most heart-wrenching scenarios and situations of love that I have ever seen, because she talks about all the different kinds of love that are out there, about platonic love, what that can mean, romantic love, what that can mean to a person. It was just so beautiful. It's almost going to make me cry talking about this because these characters seemed so real to me, and when these things that happened, I just broke down. Oh my god, it was just an amazing book. If you haven't read it already, please do. and I'm really excited to read more by Taylor Jenkins Reid, by the author. I've also read Malibu Rising by her, which I also liked, not as much as this. Probably I'm not gonna like any of her books as much as this, and I'm going to read Daisy Jones and the Six soon. But one book that I unfortunately don't have the physical copy of just yet, I ended up listening to it because I really wanted to read it, but the physical copy is just taking forever to come, and that is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This was the first book by Kristen Hanna that I read. It's historical fiction. It takes place in the Second World War France. Basically, if you don't know, the Germans basically occupied France in the Second World War. They ran over the country pretty quickly and occupied France, so most French people did live under occupied France, and obviously it wasn't a very great and nice time to live. And this book is about two sisters. One is very rebellious and activist-like, and the other one is more calm, and she has a daughter. She wants to make sure that her family is okay. Her husband's just gone off to war. So we have like one housewifey kind of sister and one sister that's like this big activist. My God, this story, I don't know, I was sobbing at the end of the story. It was just, you had so many different aspects in it. There were some parts that were kind of campy, but it was totally okay, and it was kept to a minimum. But you have everything in this. You have romance, you have adventure, you have oppression, you have accurate history. So you also learn a lot about this. As a person that did grow up in with German history, I had tons of classes about World War II and what happened in Germany, but we never really learned much about occupied France, actually, because we kind of talked more about what the Germans did wrong and didn't necessarily talk about other occupied countries. So this was really great for me also to have that perspective and to see what that was like, kind of. But at the same time, it was just, oh, it was so good. It was just so good. And I really enjoyed the story. And yeah, you have adventure, you have romance, you have the dynamics of sisters and how they can rival with each other, or how they sometimes can hate each other but love each other at the same time, and what wars can do to you. And the end was so tragic but hopeful at the same time. It made me, after this book, I absolutely believed in humanity again. And man, what else do you want from a book? I mean, seriously, it was amazing. What a ride, really. I'm so excited to have the physical copy in my collection. I really, truly am. It's one of those books where it's like, I want that physical copy in my collection. Just beautiful. We've made it to the end of the list of my favorite books of 2021. I hope I explained the books well enough, because most of these books I'm just like, oh my God, they're so great, they're so great. I hope you actually got an idea of what they're about, and I hope you're interested in reading them. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite books were this year. I'm really interested to hear what you enjoyed reading. I'm always looking for stuff on my TBR. It's not like I have way too many unread books at home. Shh, that's not true. So yeah, what a ride. I'm so glad I got to take you along for my little reading journey in 2021. I still owe you a reading wrap up, but I'm kind of waiting for the physical copies for some of the books because I listened to some of them in advance until I filmed that reading wrap up. But I'm so glad I got to meet you guys. I got to build up this tiny community, but it's so much fun to talk about books here, and I hope you enjoyed coming along with me in 2021. Bye!